What strain is this?
So on the right-hand side, this is a new strain we grew last year called Mom's Weed.
Mom's Weed?
Mom's Weed, and this is another one called Wishful Thinking.
Those are great names.
Yeah.
Wishful thinking. So I want to. When you said you were born, were you born on this property, or were
I
you
wasn't
born
born.
in the
We
hospital?
moved from Sonoma County. My parents worked in a nursery in Sonoma County, and they moved here when I was 10 years old. I think it was like 1978.
So they worked in a regular plant nursery and then came up here to
a
grow.
lumber yard and plant nursery, and we had some friends up here, and my stepdad was an avid hunter, so he came up here and he took us up here, and we just kind of fell in love with the country way of life. And they were like back to the landers. We grew our own vegetable garden. We built the garage down there. We ran 5 different businesses, and I don't know if you call them businesses. There was not one single thing at that time.
You had to do a lot of different things.
So we cut firewood in the winter time. We tried to cut 2 cords a day. We took it into town and sold it for $100 a piece.
Wow.
We had a small little nursery at the little flat. We were commercial salmon fishermen, commercial albacore fishermen, commercial crab fishermen. My stepdad did part-time logging. So we did 4 or 5 different things over the course of the year, not to make $1 million, just to make it to the next year. And what vegetables we didn't grow, our neighbors would bring over, and which ones we had they didn't have, we would share with them. So it was it started off early on for me, learning that this was a very tight-knit community, and that your word is your bond, and you could really rely on your neighbors to help you.
Well, it's famous for that, right? Humboldt County?
For sure, and that's one of the most magical things about Humboldt County and the Emerald Triangle.
And when you say you grew up, helping your mother cultivate plants, did you have to keep a secret?
So
how did your family deal with that?
I like that question, because that was, did we have to keep it secret? When I went to high school, which was 45 minutes from here, and I caught the bus at the end of the driveway, pretty much every single one of my friends, their parents were carpenters. They were all carpenters, because we all had this secret. And so,
I see, that was like
it was a secret,
the code
so just
word.
tell them we're carpenters. So we were all carpenters, our families were all carpenters. And
that's funny.
Realistically, the truth be told, now that it's legal, is that I didn't know one person in this whole county that didn't grow cannabis.
Is that right?
100%. I couldn't pick one out that didn't.
So did people ever get arrested? Or?
So there was a few and far between. Most people learned very quickly to grow outside the curtilage of your house, so they couldn't prove that it was your cannabis. So they would come and just basically drop guys down on wires off of Black Hawk helicopters. They would go and
Is that what your T-shirt's about?
They would go down and they would cut the cannabis out, and then they would pull it out of the garden site and take it to the local con camp and burn it.
So they wouldn't even interact with you. They would just...
We were nowhere to be found.
Right.
You would see a lot of times a bunch of people lined up on the sides of the roads watching the helicopters, because it was an amazing sight to watch.
I bet,
and so as the years got more and more intense with the eradication and the aerial surveillance, we had to start changing our growing techniques. So no longer could we grow in the sun. We had to grow underneath trees that we would hollow out and make sure there was a little bit of light that got through. And sometimes we would grow in trees on platforms that we built into the trees, because they were always looking on the ground. They weren't looking in the trees.
So you'd climb the trees, build platforms?
Build a platform, because if you could, back then, if you could grow, say you had 2 or 3 plants in a tree, they each got 2 pounds apiece, that's 6 pounds. At that time, it was 5,000 a pound. So one tree gave you $30,000.
Wow.
So,
and that was in the 70s and 80s?
That was the early 90s that the price was that.
So a lot of money.
A lot of money. And, it started out when we...
And that was all illegal trade,
That
right?
was all illegal trade. Yeah. And very rarely did you hear about people getting arrested and thrown in jail, because it was such a common thing in Humboldt County. It was always understood for us that your first time offense, it was always probation.
Mm.
And what I quickly came to learn, well, to go back a little bit, when I was 15, my mom finally gave me my first 10 plants.
Uh-huh.
I begged her for years. I want to do my own. I want to take care of them my own, because I saw her techniques and I had my own ideas, but she didn't really trust me enough to, you're digging mulch under the thing, you might take bugs in. So finally, when I was 15, she gave me 10 plants. At the end of the year, I think there was like 11 or 12 pounds. She sold that for me, and I bought my first piece of property when I was 15.
Amazing.
Bought 11 acres on the Eel River, and from that point forward, I was just really addicted to trying to grow the best
But
possible.
you bought
plant.
11 acres on the river when you were 15 years old?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was an amazing moment.
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah.
And so then enforcement continued to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents decided, their real love and their dream was commercial fishing. So they bought a commercial 90-foot albacore boat, and they left me to take care of the farm, not the cannabis, just take care of the roads, the house, and the dogs. And they sailed around the world commercial albacore fishing. They went to the South Pacific, they went to China, and they went up to Alaska. So they lived like 10,
Wow.
11 months out of the year on the water.
Mm-hmm.
And my best friend and I, who I grew up with here, decided to buy another smaller piece of property. And like I was saying, enforcement started to get worse. We had to start changing our growing techniques. So whereas before we would grow one plant out in the open and maybe get a 5 or 6 pound plant, we discovered that if you grew in the bushes or under the trees, you could get just as much weight in the same amount of area. All you would have to do is add a lot more plants. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of having one plant, we might have 50 plants. They were smaller, they were 1 ounce plants, maybe 2 ounce plants if you're lucky, because they didn't get as much light, because you were hiding from the aerial, surveillance and stuff. And there was quite a few summers that we were running from helicopters, and that there was 5 different helicopters in the air eradicating marijuana in Humboldt County. And
What do you think of this side of Johnny, the rebel running from the
I think
helicopter?
that's what I like about him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Did you experience that in Colorado too?
I never knew cannabis was illegal.
Uh-huh.
All my mom's friends grew up, smoked it, and grew it in their basements. I thought that that's what you did with your basement.
Just the
I
normal.
had no idea.
And what part of Colorado was that?
Denver,
Denver. Oh.
Morrison area.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
So, I mean, I think if I was him, I would be doing the same thing, maybe even a little more.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you guys are a pair. That's great.
my best friend and I were growing cannabis in the summer. We're growing under the trees, and we had quite a few plants, because that's how you had to make. We were trying to make 20 pounds a piece is
Mm-hmm.
what we were actually trying to make one summer. And this old man down our road ended up turning us in. And like I said before, we were pretty naive. We thought, you grow pot in Humboldt County, you get in trouble. What happens is you get probation, and then you could decide how you would move forward in your life. But there was this thing called the feds that none of us really knew about, because that was nothing that they really partook in Humboldt County or
Right.
the Emerald Triangle very often, or that we ever heard about. But, with the war on drugs and Ronald Reagan pushing that, they were going to make some examples of some people. And
How old were you?
so I was 22 years old, and one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, 30 federal agents showed up at my door with guns to my head, and they searched my house here and this other piece of property that I said we had. And at the end of the day, they took some items here, and they left me with a little yellow speeding ticket. And they said, we'll contact you if we want to talk to you again. And so a year and a half later, they showed back up. At that point, I said, well, maybe they messed up, or they're
Yeah.
not coming back, or, hey, we're in Humboldt County. Maybe the feds feel the same way that Humboldt County feels about it. And a year and a half later, they came back and with an arrest warrant. And for the next 3 years, I had to travel down to the San Francisco Federal Courthouse building and talk to people that really didn't know what the bud part of the plant was. And at one time, the judge had to ask for a clarification what that was. And, so these were the people that were going to end up sentencing me. And we went immediately. We went in there and we told our lawyers, look, we're guilty. We just want to tell the truth. Like, we weren't trying to hide it. They had us on film, but we were just, so we went in there and we told the judge, look, we're guilty for growing the weed, but we want you to know who we are as people, because we would never hurt anybody, and we need you to know that.
Did your
Because-
lawyer advise that? Or was that
No,
your...
he advised us against that,
Yeah.
actually. But
That's amazing that you did it.
we were pretty naive,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, at the end of the day, after 3 years going to court trying to tell him who we were, 100 people from Humboldt County drove down and sat in the courthouse when the judge stood up and sentenced us to 10 years in prison for growing a plant as a first-time nonviolent offender. And really, he thought he was doing us a favor because our bracket was 10 years to life.
Wow.
And you know, I don't look at it as something negative or bad, because when I first went into jail, I saw a lot of bitter and angry people, and I know what I did was illegal, and I deserved to get in trouble. You know, we could argue with whether or not I deserved to get that much time or not, but that doesn't help anybody at this point. So.
And you were 20, by that time about 25?
I was 28 years old when
Mhm.
I stepped into jail
Wow.
in 1996, and I didn't get out until I was in 2004. So I had to do 8 out of the 10 years. I went
For
to court
growing
for 4
marijuana.
years, and I was on probation for 5. So this has been 17 years out of my life that I gave for this plant. So
And that wasn't even for selling it, that was just for growing it?
that was conspiracy to cultivate cannabis, 2 or more
Wow.
people to grow. It's, you know, just, I guess, a conspiracy. We
Yeah.
don't know the reasons, but you know, unfortunately, when I was in there, my mom passed away, and that's why I honor the cannabis that I grow here with the strain that she grew 45
Yeah.
years ago. And you know, one super important lesson, or reminder, I should say, how impressive or how magical this community is here in the Emerald Triangle, is when I showed back up after 3,000 days of being away. And it's easy to forget about people when they're gone for that long.
Right.
I had 50 people here waiting for me to get my life back in order, and really they made this whole thing possible. So whereas they can't share what they've done because they're worried about repercussions for the IRS or from law enforcement, you know, I'm able to now take the torch and able to share our story, because I can't get in trouble for what I've already been in trouble for. And so before, when I was talking about making a difference, that's, you know, everything happens for a reason, and Rose and I are both here to make a difference in people's lives and really share the story of the Emerald Triangle.
You know, I got to say, almost every time I interview someone, I'm completely taken aback by their story, and here it's happened once again. And that's it's an amazing story, and it's amazing to see how you've come out of that, like where you are on the other side of that story. And also, it's kind of beautiful that you're able to grow marijuana legally now.